Okay, so welcome everybody to the Irish Institute for Catholic Studies today. We're delighted to welcome Dr. Mary Shanahan, who is Director of Religious Education at St. Angela's College in Sligo. She's the editor of Does Religious Education Matter, published by Routledge in 2017, and Ethics of for the Future by Cambridge Scholars Press in 2014, and co-editor of The Taylor Effect, Cambridge Scholars Press in 2010. Mary is also a member of the Royal Irish Academy's Ethical, Political, Legal and Philosophical Committee, the Advisory Board of the Irish Centre for Religious Education, the Executive Committee of the Irish Philosophical Society and the Society for Women in Philosophy, Ireland. Mary has acted as an external examiner for the MA in Religion and Education at DCU. She is also a peer reviewer for Peter Lang, Irish Theological Quarterly, International Journal of Philosophical Studies, Minute Philosophical Papers, the British Journal of Religious Education, and the Journal of the British Society for Phenomenology. Mary also regularly contributes book reviews and articles to peer-reviewed journals. Mary is also called upon from time to time as a religious education and philosophy content consultant for second-level textbook publishers. So Mary is going to talk to us today on the topic of the call to care, religious education in the age of Noddings. So thanks very much, Mary, and I'll hand it over to you there now. Thank you very much.
Thanks a million, Ian, and thanks everybody so much for joining us this afternoon. I hope you'll find the paper enjoyable. I'm just going to share my screen now so you can see my PowerPoint presentation that I've just put together to accompany my paper and maybe save you having to just look at me reading. So as Ian said, the title of my paper is The Call to Care, Religious Education in the Age of Noddings. And during my talk this afternoon, I want to explore the potential impact of Noddings' ethic of care on the teaching and learning of religious education in Irish post-primary schools. Although Noddings' comments on the need for an education in religion and beliefs are framed with reference to the American high school system, I'm of the view that their applicability outside of that particular context should not be overlooked. In my attempt to demonstrate such applicability in the Irish context, I will begin by providing an overview of Noddings' ethic of care before proceeding to a discussion of her comments on religious and moral education. I will also cross-reference this with a broad survey of the aims, rationale and contents of contemporary post-primary religious education syllabi, with a view to highlighting the receptivity of the subject to the care-based pedagogical approach propounded by Noddings. So now to begin. Part 1, Noddings' ethic of care. Noddings' ethic of care offers a care-based pedagogical approach to moral education. Such education is not distilled into any particular post-primary school subject, but rather, as Noddings argues, it is to be encompassed in a whole school approach. Further to this, the moral education of students should form the bedrock of every individual teacher's pedagogy, and in addition, the language of morality must be central to teacher education. As far as Noddings is concerned, care is the single most important educational idea there is. When we fail to care, both as school communities and as individual teachers, we do our students a grave injustice. But what exactly is this idea of care, which Noddings elucidates? In short, what Noddings is calling for is an education in care, a holistic approach to education which, while not overlooking the intellectual development of students, prioritises their moral development. In Noddings' schema, such moral development is rooted in a curriculum which teaches students both how to care and how to be cared for. Only when students have learned these vital lessons can they engage fully in their social, emotional, spiritual and intellectual development. Critically, such lessons can only be taught by teachers who care in a relational way, rather than in what we might term a merely professional way. Professional care is not, of course, insignificant, and Noddings is not seeking to make the argument that there is no need for professional care. The professional teacher cares that the objectives of the curriculum are met, that each student receives a fair measure of their attention, and encourages students to work hard, regularly praising them when they do. The downside of this, as Noddings points out, is that such encouragement can at times take the form of coercion, where students are coerced into working hard so that they attain higher grades, so that they go to college. and doesn't necessarily focus on what the students themselves need. However, teachers who commit to the relational sense of caring establish relationships with their students which are based on mutual trust, respect and concern. The relationally caring teacher is interested in their students as human persons rather than simply as their students. In Caring in Education, Noddings explains this in the following way. It is sometimes said that all teachers care. It is because they care that people go into teaching. However, this is not universally true. We have all known teachers who were cruel and uncaring, and these people should not be in teaching at all. But even for the majority who do care in the virtue sense, that is, they profess to care and work hard at their teaching, there are many who do not adopt the relational sense of caring. They care in the sense that they conscientiously pursue certain goals for their students, and they often work hard at coercing students to achieve those goals. These teachers must be credited with caring in the virtue sense of the word. However, these same teachers may be unable to establish relations of care and trust. Note here that Noddings does not claim that teachers who exhibit professional care for their students, what she terms the virtue sense of care, are incapable of building trust-based, caring relationships with their students. However, she is suggesting that this is a much less likely outcome for the professionally caring teacher than it is for the teacher who operates within a framework of relational care. The reason for this is that the professionally caring teacher is often distracted by their desire to help their students to achieve academic success, a desire which is for sure often shared by their students. And so their commitment ends up being to examination grades rather than to the persons they are helping to achieve that goal. The relationally caring teacher, however, is committed to the moral education of their students, and so their desires are aligned with the holistic development of their learners as caring and cared for persons. This is summed up very neatly in the Challenge to Care in Schools, where Noddings writes that caring relations can prepare children for an initial receptivity to all sorts of experiences and subject matters. Unfortunately, merely contractual relations can keep them busy for a long time at work for which they have no real talent or interest. The students of the merely professionally caring teacher, then, are similarly distracted by an incomplete or insufficient goal. They are focused on the matter of the subject at which they wish to excel, whereas the students of the relationally caring teacher learn what it is to matter. This point brings us on to perhaps one of the most striking features of Noddings' ethic of care. Her claim that relational caring must be demonstrated by both the teacher and the students. It is not enough for the teacher alone to do the caring, for this does not truly result in a relationship. And remember that for Noddings, it is the caring relation which is key to moral education. The caring relation must be reciprocal, for it is in this way that learners learn not only to be cared about, but also to care for. This daily reciprocity of caring is what should underpin all encounters between teacher and student, therefore. That is not to say that the teacher must care, that is not to say that the student must care for the teacher to the same extent to which the teacher cares for the student. In fact, Noddings holds that the student's caring is different from that of the teacher. What is critical is that owing to the fact that it is necessarily relational, care is experienced as reciprocal in the classroom and of course beyond the classroom. As the one caring, the student's responsiveness as the cared for is highly significant for the teacher. As Noddings puts it, the student's responsiveness as the cared for completes the caring. Of no small importance in the caring classroom is open dialogue. As a pedagogical tool, dialogue fosters relatedness between the one caring and the cared for, as well as reciprocal telling and listening. Now, because open dialogue opens up conversations rather than shutting them down, Noddings argues that a foundation of trust is key. Such a foundation is established and built upon through caring classroom encounters. When the student feels safe in the classroom, i.e. when he or she knows that they can trust the teacher to care for them, then they will enter into the sort of open dialogue which promotes understanding and empathy. In caring, Noddings explains this as follows. The purpose of dialogue is to come into contact with ideas and to understand, to meet the other and to care. I will return to this description of dialogue again in part 3 of my talk, but for now, I want to consider Noddings' thinking in relation to the study of religion in public schools. Part 2, Moral and Religious Education for Intelligent Belief and Unbelief. For Noddings, the moral education of children is intimately bound up with their development as caring and cared for persons. Accordingly, she advocates for a school-based provision of an education in care which will promote the moral flourishing of students while also supporting them in critically exploring their belief or unbelief. In her aptly titled 1993 work, Educating for Intelligent Belief or Unbelief, Noddings argues that teachers, in this case primarily mathematics and science teachers, should be willing and able to engage in discussions about existential and metaphysical questions. The reason for this, Noddings correctly observes, is that meaningful questions such as these cannot and should not be neatly blocked off into one subject or another. As she puts it, existential questions should form the organising backbone of the curriculum, and they should be appropriate everywhere. This is because such questions, and our responses to them, lie at the core of our being, and as such, they are intrinsically bound up with our beliefs and values. We therefore carry our beliefs and values with us everywhere, and it is simply not reasonable to expect that they are only relevant to subjects or courses which have been deemed appropriate by the relevant authorities. Noddings makes a compelling case for the inclusion of the study of existential and metaphysical questions alongside of the study of religious and secular ethics in teacher education programmes. Such questions include: does God exist? Are there gods? Where did I come from? How did the universe start? And what is the meaning of life? By studying such content, she argues, student teachers would develop a rich appreciation of the interconnectedness of not only apparently disparate subject disciplines, but also of the fundamental relationship between education and life as lived. As far as Noddings is concerned, this would undoubtedly contribute to students' moral development. Now, while a comparative education study is not the purpose of my talk today, it is very important to remind ourselves at this point that Noddings is writing primarily about the kind of education provided in the American high school system, whereby a programme of state-designed and state-approved religious education, as has been developed at post-primary level in Ireland, is not a feature of public schools. While students may be offered a programme of study in world religions, the approach is very much that of learning about religion rather than learning from religion. There are also constitutional considerations at play which limit the extent to which questions about God, religion and spirituality may be discussed in state-run schools in the US. In their 2017 book, Teaching Controversial Issues, The Case for Critical Thinking and Moral Commitment in the Classroom, Noddings and Brooks explain the current state of play regarding the study of religion. Should religion be taught in our public schools? In most parts of the United States today, a course in world religions is permitted, but the contradictions of belief inherent in religion are usually avoided. Students know, for example, that religion involves the idea of God or gods. Dare we discuss, however, the variety of approaches to the questions? Is there a God? How has this God been described? Most teachers would not dare to encourage a careful consideration of atheism, and few would give critical attention to the deistic leanings of our founding fathers or to the deeply divergent views of religion on slavery. These topics are so controversial that we doubt they can be included in a standard curriculum. However, they are central to human life. Bearing this in mind, it would seem that little has changed with regard to the study of religion in the US state school system between the writing of Educating for Intelligent Belief or Unbelief in 1993 and this more recent co-authored work. It is thus within a fraught context that Noddings makes her careful pedagogical suggestions in relation to both teacher education and the high school curriculum, wagering that an education in care and the development of the capacity for critical thinking will be key in resolving this challenging situation. Unlike the US context, there are, as we know, currently several well-developed Irish religious education post-primary syllabi which delve into the metaphysical and existential significance of religions and beliefs, with student teachers of religious education engaging in rigorous study of such over the course of their teacher education programmes. The key existential and metaphysical questions which Noddings outlined in Educating for Intelligent Belief or Unbelief are explored across a range of modules, and during their school placement experiences, student teachers of religious education are encouraged to explore such questions with their learners, on the understanding that this approach will be a key feature of their job as fully qualified RE teachers. It is reasonable to assert then that the programmes of teacher education for RE are at least designed with the intention of equipping RE teachers with the knowledge, skills and attitudes needed to contribute to the moral development of their students. However, taking a cue from Noddings, the question ought also to be asked: how many student teachers of mathematics, English, science or woodwork, etc. complete modules on world religions, ethics, religious studies, theology or philosophy, save for philosophy of education? Precious few, if any at all, I would wager. Even less likely is the mandatory inclusion of such modules across post-primary initial teacher education programmes. Given the ever-increasing plurality of Irish society and our growing awareness of ourselves as global citizens, I am, like Noddings, inclined to suggest that this is to the detriment of both student teachers and their students. I would certainly suggest that this is something that those of us engaged in teacher education should swiftly begin to remedy, but that's a paper for another day. And if I started on that, I think we'd be here long past 4 o'clock. I would like, though, now to return to our focus on religious education with a view to exploring its receptivity to Noddings' education in care. And so we turn to part 3 of my talk, post-primary religious education and the ethic of care. At first glance, it would appear that there is a great deal of concordance between the post-primary religious education syllabi and Noddings' account of the pedagogical contents, for want of a better term, an approach of an education in care. As early as the 1995 White Paper on Education, it has been argued by the state that not only is it a fundamental aim of the Irish education system to foster the moral, spiritual, religious, social and cultural values of students, but also that religious education is a subject which is best placed to do so. Such a position is also echoed in the aims of the Leaving Certificate Religious Education syllabus, with the fifth aim being to contribute to the spiritual and moral development of the student. In addition, the recently developed religious education specification for junior cycle explicitly addresses the moral core of the subject, as well as its foundation in critical thinking. Consider, for example, the following words from the rationale. Religious education provides a particular space for students to encounter and engage with the deepest and most fundamental questions relating to life, meaning and relationships. It encourages students to reflect, question, critique, interpret, imagine and find insight for their lives. The student's own experience and continuing search for meaning is encouraged and supported. Religious education supports the development of students by helping them to explore how religious and other beliefs are expressed, engage with life's big questions, and reflect on moral values for life. A similar position is outlined in Planning for Religious Education Curriculum Framework for Senior Cycle, or as it's often affectionately referred to, the non-exam syllabus. Here an emphasis is placed upon the spiritual and moral development of students from all faiths and none. It is hoped that this attentiveness to the spiritual and moral development of all students of religious education will also foster a healthy respect for the beliefs of others and an openness to dialogue in search of mutual understanding. Strikingly similar language is used in the rationale for Leaving Certificate Applied Religious Education draft, where the related concepts of personal growth and spiritual development are placed at the heart of religious education, alongside of the human search for meaning. What emerges very clearly from the various syllabi is a picture of religious education as a subject which is explicitly concerned with the moral and spiritual development of students, in addition to the reality of the human search for meaning and our fascination with metaphysical and existential questions. One might say that, in other words, religious education is framed as a subject which provides for an education in intelligent belief and intelligent unbelief. It is a subject for all which understands itself as intrinsically connected to the ebb and flow of the students' real, or more aptly, full lives. It is also a subject which supports the moral and spiritual development of students through the teacher's use of pedagogies which are designed to elicit, instill and develop critical thinking. However, all of this can only be achieved if the subject is taught well, and in concordance with the approach outlined by Noddings, I am of the view that it cannot be taught well by a teacher who does not care in the relational sense. How else can the teacher create the kind of safe atmosphere required for engagement with life's big questions and moral values, if not through the establishment of caring relations which are built on trust? Perhaps the most important pedagogical tool to be deployed in establishing such relations is dialogue. At this point, I'd like to recall Noddings' description of dialogue. Remember, she wrote, "The purpose of dialogue is to come into contact with ideas and to understand, to meet the other and to care." On Noddings' account, it would be very difficult for the professionally caring teacher to engage in such dialogue with their students, and it would certainly be impossible for bad teachers to do so. Relationally caring teachers, however, appear to do this almost innately. I would like to make the case that the best kinds of religious education teachers are those who are committed to the ethic of care. In other words, good RE teachers are relationally caring teachers. What such good religious education teachers know is that dialogue is the key to providing their students with opportunities to grow morally and spiritually through learning from RE. Like Noddings, they know that everything we do then as teachers has moral overtones, and therefore the manner in which they dialogue will be sensitive, open, respectful, and worthy of the trust of their learners. A great number of religious education theorists emphasise the significance of dialogue for good RE teaching. Thomas Groom, for example, includes dialogue as one of the stages of his shared practice approach. Michael Grimmett's Learning from Approach to Religious Education and his 4 RE-related pedagogical principles are infused with the spirit of open and hospitable dialogue. Gloria Durka outlines an approach to religious education which actively engages students' imaginations and is rooted in dialogue. Liam Gearan views dialogue as an essential part of what happens in the RE classroom, while Robert Jackson's interpretive approach is founded on a sensitive and respectful dialogical approach. Now, there are many, many other RE theorists I could mention here today, but the limits of time won't allow that. At European level, we also see that both the Toledo Guidelines and the Council of Europe's Signpost, which incidentally was written by Jackson, repeatedly refer to dialogue as the key to effective teaching about religions and beliefs. Suffice it to say, across the vast swathes of material written about good practices in religious education, the theme of dialogue occurs again and again. Like Noddings, the authors of such material recognise that how we teach is as important as what we teach. To go a step further, I would suggest that there are many in the field of education who recognise religious education teaching as a relationally caring endeavour, even if they do not outline it in the exact terms in which Noddings presents her care-based approach to education. There is also another aspect of religious education which, I think, supports my claim that it is a subject which is highly receptive to Noddings' ethic of care. It's interdisciplinarity. As teachers of a subject which is interdisciplinary in nature, being comprised of aspects of theology, scriptural studies, religious studies, philosophy and ethics, religious educators certainly lean in the direction of the Renaissance people Noddings would like to see teaching in schools. Further to this, a closer look at the religious education syllabi yields a rich interdisciplinary harvest. To consider just one example, Section A of the Leaving Certificate Religious Education Syllabus, The Search for Meaning and Values, requires that the teacher familiarise him or herself with a range of content from a broad variety of disciplines. In order to provide students with an opportunity to fully engage with this section of the syllabus, the teacher will need to draw upon the disciplines of art, history, music, literature, film, cultural studies, philosophy, theology, science, ethics, and sociology. So it's a tall order. Might we say that there's something of the care-based approach to education at play here? Certainly in the critique of liberal education which reverberates throughout her work, Noddings espouses an interdisciplinary approach that breaks down the boundaries between disciplines. Thus we see her arguing for the need for English teachers to pay attention to historical events, maths teachers to literature, and science teachers to religious responses to the question of origins of the universe. While the study of religion as we conceive of it in religious education is not for Noddings necessarily required as a discrete subject within the curriculum, she certainly deems its contents to be relevant, essential even, to the wide range of subjects being taught in US high schools. Perhaps it is not unreasonable to assume that she might well be sympathetic to the interdisciplinary approach taken in our religious education syllabi. However, at this point, it would be remiss to overlook an important note of dissonance between my position in relation to RE and that of Noddings: the question of assessment. While Noddings does not negate the need for the academic and intellectual development of students, she very clearly privileges their moral development over and above such. Perhaps unsurprisingly then, a consistent theme throughout her work on care-based education is her scepticism in relation to the value of standardised testing and assessment. In particular, Noddings is alarmed by the message given to students that to succeed is to do well in the test so that one can go to college, and she asks why we have allowed this to occur. She sees real value in a variety of forms of education, which begin in care and which are aimed at meeting the needs of the child rather than the requirements of the examination. With regard to testing in relation to the study of religions and beliefs, her comments are particularly interesting and form an extension of her point that such study need not be covered in a formalised manner. Aside from her contention that anything that becomes part of the formal curriculum is cast far too specifically and rigidly, she's also committed to the view that good, i.e. care-based education, is not a laborious endeavour, but a gift. From Noddings' perspective, aligning the study of religion to a standardised test, such as is done at junior cycle and leaving certificate levels in Ireland, removes this sense of being gifted with educational treasures. She explains, teachers tell stories, guide the logic of discussion, point to further readings, model both critical thinking and kindness, and show by their openness what it means to seek intelligent belief or unbelief. Students long for gifts of this sort from their teachers. This is an interesting stance and one which I'm not wholly unsympathetic to. Certainly there is much anecdotal evidence which suggests that teachers of non-exam religious education often feel less constrained than their exam-based RE counterparts. We often hear, for example, that there is too much content in the Leaving Certificate syllabus to allow for lengthy discussions, and the desire to finish the course can take precedence over the desire to allow students to learn from religious education. But does this mean that we should agree with Noddings' suggestion and dispense with examinations for religious education? I'm going to put my cards on the table here and say that it does not. It strikes me that it is perfectly possible, indeed I have witnessed this firsthand on many occasions, to teach academically rigorous exam-based religious education and engage in the approach being suggested by Noddings above. Consider here my earlier comments on dialogue and its recurrence in academic work on the effective teaching of RE. The point is that one must begin with the latter, i.e. work from a foundation of relation and trust before one can hope to assist learners to also achieve the former. Thus I'm suggesting, like Noddings, that the care of the student takes precedence over their academic or intellectual development. As she puts it very nicely, the student is infinitely more important than the subject matter. However, unlike Noddings, I do not believe that this precludes the use of an examination to assess the academic content studied in religious education. It is important to clarify that what is to be tested is the academic content alone, and not the beliefs and values of the students. While such beliefs and values certainly do not disappear come exam time, it would not be appropriate to assess or judge students in relation to their most deeply held personal convictions. Very interestingly, the Leaving Certificate Religious Education syllabus includes a statement which more or less says just that. Students' personal faith commitment and/or affiliation to a particular religious grouping will not be subject to assessment for national certification. A similar statement was also included in the Junior Certificate Religious Education syllabus, although it appears to be absent from the Junior Cycle Religious Education specification. In effect, I'm of the view that although Noddings is not convinced of the need for a specific programme of study in religions and beliefs, the Irish religious education syllabi display many of the features she outlines as key to a care-based educational curriculum. Recall, for example, my comments on critical thinking, interdisciplinarity, and the priority of the student. In addition, much of the literature in relation to contemporary religious education emphasises the values of trust, empathy, relationality, dialogue and openness, which Noddings places at the centre of her care-based approach to moral education. For example, Robert Jackson's interpretive approach, which aims for a conversational form of learning, which can accommodate diversity and difference. and which places empathy at the centre of the relationship between teacher and student. Consider also the Toledo guidelines and the emphasis placed therein upon both empathy and openness when teaching about religions and beliefs in schools. And these are just two examples, and I could go on, but I won't. And so we come towards the end of my paper. And I'm sure some of you are perhaps breathing a sigh of relief hearing that. So at the commencement of this paper, I began by providing a brief account of Noddings' relational approach to care-based education. In so doing, I highlighted her compelling claim that the care of the teacher for his or her students must go beyond merely professional standards of care and towards relational care instead. In this way, students learn how to care and, equally as importantly, how to care for one another. In short, they learn that they matter, and they also learn how to show others that they matter. Noddings encapsulates this very well in Educating Moral People, where she writes that our main educational aim should be to encourage the growth of competent, caring, loving and lovable people. This, she argues, we must seek to establish a strong ethical foundation of care in our classrooms before we can commence our academic curriculum of study. More than this, our academic curriculum of study must at all times be permeated by this ethical foundation of care. Having provided this overview of Noddings' education and care, I then moved on to a consideration of her thinking in relation to moral and spiritual education, particularly in relation to the related ideas of intelligent belief and intelligent unbelief. There, I highlighted her insights regarding the benefits of an interdisciplinary approach to education, particularly in relation to questions of beliefs and values. I also briefly noted the differences between the situation for teaching about religions and beliefs in the US public school context in comparison to RE in Irish post-primary schools, intimating the interdisciplinary advantages of the latter. In the final section of the paper, I considered Noddings' emphasis on dialogue alongside of a range of theoretical perspectives on good teaching in RE, noting that dialogue was a recurring theme therein. I also commented on several areas of concordance between Noddings' approach and Irish post-primary RE syllabi. Highlighting the syllabi's emphasis on moral and spiritual development, critical thinking and inquiry and fundamental questions of meaning, I argue that much of the spirit of Noddings' thinking in relation to teaching about religions and beliefs is already present in these syllabi. However, I also explored the challenge posed by Noddings' rejection of the notion of testing in relation to religions and beliefs. Here I consider the junior cycle and leaving certificate exam-based approach in light of Noddings' comments, concluding that it is quite possible to teach exam-based religious education in the caring manner articulated by Noddings. Ultimately, I hope that I've shown that many of the key features of Noddings' care-based approach to moral education are already present across a range of post-primary religious education syllabi in Ireland. I've also attempted to demonstrate a strong link between Noddings' thinking in relation to dialogue and that of a range of perspectives on the importance of dialogue for good religious education thinking. There is certainly much to be learned from reflecting on Noddings' legitimate concerns about standardised testing and their impact on the classroom experiences of students. I'm of the view that her emphasis on the significance of how we teach should not be overlooked. And as I've argued, it strikes me that good religious education teaching is precisely the sort of teaching encapsulated in her account of the relationally caring teacher. Furthermore, Noddings' comments in relation to a broader need for interdisciplinarity amongst teachers are food for thought. For my part, I'm in agreement with Noddings that all student teachers should study religions, beliefs and fundamental questions of meaning. I would go a step further, however, and advocate that all student teachers of all subjects should study a range of modules which will equip them for the moral challenges of teaching. And perhaps that'll be the subject of my next lecture. So for now, I would just like to say thank you all very much for listening. And if anybody has any questions, I would be very happy to respond to them now. Thank you very much.